USL adopting division sanctioning, adopting promotion relegation. Those are all very important milestones to, I think, moving the overall attractiveness of the league to any investor and any player. I think that's all really, really important. It's something I'm very proud of. The state deserves a team like Rhode Island FC. It deserves a stadium like we have now. It was not an easy project by any means. To my credit, and by extension the credit of my ownership group, the credit of the governor, the credit of the mayor of Pawtucket, we all stuck together to make it a reality. As we like to say, we only make money on the investment once our investors have done well. And unless they do well, we won't do well.
Welcome back to the Football Economy, the show that goes beyond the pitch to unpack the strategy, finance, and innovation shaping global football. I'm your host, Ibrahim, and today's guest is one of the most dynamic investors in modern sport. His name is Brett Johnson. Brett is the founder and CEO of Benevolent Capital, with investments spanning venture capital, real estate, and professional sports. He helped bring Ipswich Town FC back to life, restoring ambition with momentum to one of England's most historic clubs. He's also the founder of Phoenix Rising FC, 2023 USL Cup champions, and the driving force behind Rhode Island FC, where he's built a $140 million stadium and club from the ground up, despite the naysayers. Beyond football, Brett sits on the board of Surf Sports, the largest youth soccer platform in the US, and he's backing the Honda Rodeo and Music Festival, which is an ambitious new entertainment venture. Without any further ado, welcome to the show, Brett.
Yeah, thank you, my friend. Really appreciate that warm introduction. Whoever does your research, give them a raise, because you highlighted some things that are basically brand new. So well done.
Well, that person would be me, but thank you.
All right.
All right. To sort of to pare the layers backwards, I mean, you have a fascinating background in the sense that you come from two entrepreneurs, or I'd say entrepreneurs by sheer force. So your mom is well known, documented. Your mom was the ambassador to Jamaica from 2025, and she obviously has a very entrepreneurial background in the sense that she started her own business, way before that, which is ongoing and successful. Your dad also has his own entrepreneurial businesses, and he's also has this shared determination around trying to make sure that he has the ability to continue to be entrepreneurial in nature. My question to you is, how is this sort of like parents being your idols or your models, how has that sort of shaped the person you currently are and the person you're trying to raise kids to be?
Yeah, I'm blessed. I'm blessed, for a lot of reasons, but it would start with just an exceptional mother and father that, yeah, for sure, shaped me, served me well, inspire me, both, as you highlighted, their respective entrepreneurial journeys. In many respects, I view myself as an entrepreneur today. Everything I do, I approach from a very entrepreneurial perspective. And so it's in my DNA. Some families come from a background in medicine, or they're lawyers, or, accountants, whatever. I certainly come from a background where, directly with my parents, a big motivation for what I do today comes about as a result of my upbringing from the two of them.
Right. And if I'm not mistaken, I mean, this is a football economy podcast. As the name states, we're talking about everything related to the economy of football. And if I look at your sort of like your track record of football enthusiasm, it says that you basically encountered the passion for football during your time in London in your late 20s. And basically you were running this firm and traveling around the world, Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Asia. Sort of how has that sort of shaped your worldview in terms of how globalized this sport is, but also the opportunities that it's presented for you so far?
Yeah, I talk about it often when I was in my 20s, so a long time ago. I mean, to date myself, that was 30 years ago. I had the fortune to be based in London and travel all over the world. And what I recognized, being young and trying to navigate different cultures and business environments, I realized that football was an outstanding icebreaker. And as I call it, it's the world's second religion, if you will. And so that really planted a seed in me relative to what I believe would be the United States' ultimate passion for the beautiful game, and then also improved performance, which led, a little over 10 years ago, when I had the epiphany and recognized that Phoenix was one of the biggest and best markets in the world without a professional soccer team. And that started this journey that I'm on, which began with Phoenix Rising, extended to Ipswich, now covers Rhode Island. And now I have the interest and investment and sit on the board, as you mentioned, with Surf Sports, which is the largest youth soccer platform in the United States. And anyway, I feel the journey's been fantastic, and I feel like I'm just getting started. As great as it's been the last 10 years, and whatever my hopes or aspirations were very early on, I couldn't have dreamed to have reached, if you will, the levels that I've reached in such a short period of time. That wasn't the initial inspiration. It's just come about organically, and I feel, as I said, that the next 10 years are going to be even more exciting than the last, and that says a lot.
Right. Yeah, and you stated something very pivotal there, organic, and it seems like everything in your life happens to come about organically. I mean, is it a coincidence that it probably is, but is it a coincidence that the firm, the club that you've raised from the ground up, which is Rhode Island, sits in the same states as the university you went to in terms of Brown University? How's that come about in terms of willing something to into existence in that sense?
Yeah, one of my companies is called Fortuitous Partners, and the definition of fortuitous, is basically things happen for a reason, and I don't think there are really accidents in this world. I think people come into your life for a reason, opportunities arise for a reason, and so when I think about Rhode Island, I was looking for a market in particular to expand my relationship with the United Soccer League, with USL. And I had the fortune of going to Brown University. So I spent 4 years in the state. I knew how beautiful Rhode Island is. I knew how special a market it is. And also I started to see a trend that I think a lot of people had not picked up on, which is that when there's a World Cup game or any soccer game for that matter on television, Rhode Island is almost always in the top 10 for viewership. And that says a lot because Rhode Island's the smallest state in the union. It's the smallest state in America. So I saw that trend line, and then the baseball team, a professional baseball team, picked up and left the state of Rhode Island, moved to Massachusetts. And that was the tipping point for me to reach out to USL and buy the rights to a USL franchise for Rhode Island, and then start putting the business plan and the team together to build the stadium we have now, which is this $140 million world-class multi-purpose venue right off the highway on a beautiful river. And now we'll develop all the real estate around it. So it hasn't been an easy project, but now that the stadium's open, and in the short period of time, we've already hosted a friendly between Nicaragua and Puerto Rico. We've had a rugby championship. We just announced Brown University is going to be playing a college football game there against the in-state rivals, University of Rhode Island. We've had women's rugby. Obviously, we've got the men's Rhode Island team. So it's been amazing how that stadium is already starting to change literally the state of Rhode Island. As a result, it's becoming the sport and entertainment capital for the state, which I always predicted it would do.
I mean, there's something you also probably have stated previously, the opportunity zone tax, the tax cuts. That's sort of like an incentive driver, and it's something that I believe that a lot of people, with capital, be it human capital or different other capital, try to basically follow as a policy tool. How does that sort of shape the decision to consider Rhode Island and this sort of like location? Because as you say, location is all that matters.
Yeah, I've said it a lot that if I were to do the project again, I would still choose the location that we built the stadium on, and we'll develop all the surrounding real estate. The added benefit of positively being able to utilize the Opportunity Zone program to attract private capital in partnership with the public support that we have, both from the state of Rhode Island and from the city of Pawtucket. So I'm very proud of how we've been able to put all of those pieces together. We now have an incredible experience in terms of how to get a, relatively speaking, an expensive stadium financed in an emerging market or a secondary or smaller market for an expansion team for, if you will, a second division club. We're not Major League Soccer. We're the level right below it, as you and your listeners are, I'm sure, well aware. So we've checked a lot of boxes in terms of what I'll call breaking new or emerging ground. And I think that'll prove to be a pathway where a lot of other clubs will start to emulate what we did. And I think that'll be very positive for the USL. I think it'll be very positive for North American football. if you will, with humility, we have figured out how to bring an incredible venue, get it financed in a market that historically has been very, very underserved. And there's a ton of markets like that in the United States. I'm excited to see just how many other markets can get engaged in a similar fashion based on what we've been able to achieve.
Right. And then in terms of looking at the big picture, in this case, your firm, your investment firm, which is Benevolent Capital, I know about your philosophy and sort of like the model you've created, which is the zero management fees and no promotes until investors receive a 2x return. This is quite unique in terms of like traditional investment firms. My question to you is more philosophical in the sense that does this come from watching both parents who are entrepreneurs um, approach things from a win-win sort of like approach where each side should benefit equally or as much as each other? Is that what has led you and your brother to do this?
Yeah, there are a lot of reasons behind Benevolent Capital's approach to that construct. I guess so. As an entrepreneur, I'm blessed. So Benevolent Capital is what I call my family office. Everything I do comes under the umbrella of Benevolent Capital. If anyone visits our website, they'll see our private equity interests, our venture capital, our sports, and our real estate. I have an identical twin brother who does the heavy lift on private equity and venture capital, and he really runs Benevolent Capital day in and day out. That's kind of his baby, if you will. I spend much more time on the sports and real estate. But when it comes to the private equity and venture capital, we have everything from Aura Ring, which is, one of the leading wearables. We have Athletic Brewing, which is the leading non-alcoholic beer. But our approach with Benevolent is exactly that. As you said, we do not charge management fees. We always invest our own money into the vehicle. And then we go out to our network and raise or syndicate the balance of the capital. We bet on ourselves in exchange for not taking a management fee once we've provided our investors with a 100% return. So if they put $1 in, they get $2 back. Once they've gotten the double, we take a 30% promote. So we take typically the economic model for private equity is a 2% management fee and a 20% promote. We're taking a 0% management fee. And after 100% return, we then take a 30% promotes. Anyway, a long way of my saying we're kind of betting on ourselves, and our investors, they like that construct. They appreciate it. And they're more than happy to support that trade-off. Because as we like to say, we only make money on the investment once our investors have done well. And unless they do well, we won't do well. And far too often, I find traditional private equity, a lot of the general partners in funds, they don't have much skin in the game. They're making a ton of money on management fees. And I would just say that the incentive is not as clear in terms of, where the rewards lie. In other words, they can do very well even when an investment doesn't work out. And I struggle with that construct. I said differently, I don't think investors are really keen to continue to support that kind of model. But for sake of full disclosure, I have a sports fund with my co-founder in Phoenix Rising, Berkay Bakai, and we do charge a 2% management fee. We take a 20% promote after an 8. So there's a different side of my business that does take sort of a traditional. So it just depends on the context. But in general, it's a long way of saying that for our core assets under Benevolent Capital, I really do like and appreciate the approach. And I know that our investors do as well.
I should say that you also have Emma Chamberlain's coffee and influencer, YouTuber. It's also part of your portfolio. But yeah, I mean, does this approach that you take when it comes to your portfolio or in terms of investing, I'd like to understand more of that, which is the who, not how principle. It's based on a book by Dan Sullivan of the same name. If you could give me like a specific example of how this approach works in reality, specifically to sports.
Yeah, I'll give 2 examples. Mark Ashton, who's the CEO of Ipswich, I had the honor and pleasure of meeting him when he was the CEO of Bristol City. And Mark came to a board meeting at USL and he gave a presentation on English football. I was so impressed by him that I effectively said, look, if I ever have the honor of doing anything in England, I would like to do it with you. Or said differently, I will never do anything in England unless I can do it with someone like you. But so long story short, immediately after acquiring Ipswich, we brought Mark Ashton in as the CEO. I mean, empirically, I can almost prove he's the best CEO, or if not the best, one of the best CEOs, certainly in English football. And so he deserves a disproportionate amount of the credit for the turnaround of Ipswich in such a short period of time, both the promotions, back-to-back promotions, et cetera. But more importantly, it's the revitalization of a world-class asset that had been really going the wrong direction for 20 plus years. So that he's a perfect example of a who. And I think, I say this all the time, I think where teams get into trouble is when someone has been successful in a certain area, made money, and they mistake that success to somehow thinking that they'll be successful in sport. And I think with rare exceptions, that's where money goes to die when someone if they start to think that they can decide what the best roster would be or who to sign. And I mean, I wouldn't wish that on anyone. But anyway, it's a long way of my saying that I would never, ever mistake myself with being competent or capable in running a football club or managing a team. I feel my responsibility is always to surround myself with the best people possible. And God bless, more often than not, I feel like I've been getting that right. And I'll just finish it up by saying my partnership with Dan Krober in Rhode Island. If not for Dan Krober, the stadium never gets built. You can have the best vision in the world, but if you're not surrounding yourself with someone like him who has the background, he has the demeanor to get the stuff done, it'll go nowhere. And so, as I like to say a lot, I do deserve credit for the vision that is Rhode Island with the stadium and the team, et cetera. But everything beyond that has been Dan and a host of others that have really helped to execute to make that a reality.
And this lends credence to the fact that you take from your mom when it comes to being able to work with people, working in group settings, be very diplomatic. And my question to this is basically, you mentioned partnerships, you mentioned the who, not how approach in terms of how you've applied this. You have a partnership with different stakeholders when it comes to Rhode Island. And one specific partnership that strikes me is the Centerville Bank. I want to understand what sort of mindset do you take into consideration when you try to figure out who you want to partner with. And then I have a full question after that regarding the initiatives that you guys have both taken on.
The CEO of Centerville Bank is a gentleman by the name of Hal Horvat, born and raised in Rhode Island. And to his credit, he was an early acolyte of what the team Rhode Island FC represents to the state of Rhode Island. And then importantly, saw the incomparable asset of that stadium. I was just thrilled to see us strike a long-term partnership with each other. I believe it's one of the smartest moves any corporate leader in the state of Rhode Island could have done. The exposure that Centerville Bank is positively receiving, we were on CBS Sports national broadcast 2 weeks ago. The attention, again, when Brown University announces that they're going to play in Centerville Bank, the amount of attention, positive attention, specifically to Centerville and by extension to that stadium is incredible and well worth the investment that he and his bank have made in terms of those naming rights. But at the end of the day, I say it all the time, for the right opportunity, the stakeholders, it could be almost a commodity. You want someone who's strategic. You always want a strategic partner, and Centerville Bank is a strategic partner, and they're just an absolute pleasure to work with. And I love seeing the way they're growing and they're benefiting from the relationship, not only with the stadium, but also with the team. But as I like to say, if I could wave a magic wand, I couldn't do any better than what we've done with that partnership. And again, I'm very, very dedicated to them, but also Breeze, which is our front of Jersey sponsor. That's the airline that serves Rhode Island, the positive exposure that they're getting as well. But what you need, the way this business works is you need world-class partnerships. You need world-class fans. You can't take anything for granted. You have to work and you have to earn their loyalty and respect and effectively investment every single day.
Right. You have to also be aligned with those partners. This is what you've done very well. Right. I mean, there's this initiative that caught my eye, which is the 401 initiative. If I'm not mistaken, this is basically $4.01 tickets for Rhode Island games, for Rhode Island residents specifically. And where does this initiative come from, and what's the long-term goal for this initiative?
Yeah, the credit for that goes to Centerville Bank. The telephone area code for the state of Rhode Island is 401. So someone in their marketing department came up with the idea of the 401, ticket. And so it's for $4.01. They have a certain allocation of tickets that they make available every game. I mean, if you can find a more affordable price for a professional sport ticket in the United States, I'd like to see it. But regardless of whether someone pays $4.01 or if they're paying, our supporters section price, which is probably somewhere around $16, all the way up to, full hospitality with food, beverage, parking, et cetera, which is probably running, for a game, $100 plus. there's price points for everyone, but I feel very strongly about making sure that we're providing an affordable ticket and a world-class experience that a family can afford. I am shocked. I live in Los Angeles, so it's probably not the best example because it's such an expensive market to begin with, but I'm shocked with what it would cost for the average family of four to go to a Major League Baseball game, an NFL game. I candidly, I just don't know who's got that kind of discretionary income. It's staggering how expensive it's getting. I went to a baseball game. It cost me $50 just to park, and it wasn't good parking. You start to add all the, you go to buy food, and it's, you need to take a loan out to buy, some food.
Right. I completely agree with you that the cost of living and the cost of different other factors, day-to-day factors are rising tremendously, not just in the US, but also here in Europe. Inflation is a factor consistently. But they do say that football is a sports inflation and assets, but let's see. So, I mean, you have this stadium called Centerville Bank Stadium, obviously with your partnership with Centerville. My question here is basically this idea about making sure that the stadium actually is a center of a multi sort of like entertainment center as opposed to just having it as a, basically a football stadium. Is this coming from adjacent markets such as the J League, which incorporates this across board in your league? And potentially also, I know you want this to be a 365-day open event center. What's sort of like a long-term vision for this in terms of the impact it can be to the residents, to the community? And obviously, that will go alongside the Opportunity Zone Tax Act. Yeah, that would be my question.
Yeah, I think when we fully stabilize the stadium, we'll have, obviously, we've got the Rhode Island FC, the men's team. We're going to add a women's team. We have been doing a whole host of, third-party partnerships. As I mentioned, the Friendly, Major League Rugby, the Brown University game. We'll start to add concerts. So I think on a fully stabilized basis, the stadium has the potential to be hosting something, I mean, practically every night of the year. And increasingly, we are renting out event spaces in the stadium. The views of the river, the quality of the food, the ease of parking, it makes it very, very attractive. I mean, over time, we'll host weddings at the stadium. We'll host graduations. We've hosted a lot of foundation and other nonprofit events. We have a big food truck event. It's a culinary food and drink festival that's coming up. So the ability of these assets in terms of the versatility just continues to grow. But from my perspective, I would love to see this asset have something of note multiple times a week, and we're well ahead of my hopes or expectations at this point. And I look forward as more and more people become aware of just how exceptional this facility is. It's only going to be a virtuous, positive cycle of additional demand.
And I mean, when you consider the fact that did not necessarily dodge the bullet, but you considered investing in or participating in ownership of Newcastle United prior to going towards Ipswich. If you could, without obviously going into details, in terms of that sort of like due diligence and approach, what did you see that struck you as sort of like peculiar when it came to Newcastle as an investment opportunity?
Yeah, at the time we were contemplating Newcastle, we would have been 20% of the ownership group. Things, as I said, fortuitously, things happen for a reason. And I feel we were fortunate that that didn't proceed because what I realize now is I wouldn't want to be that small of an ownership stake in an asset that I really had very little say or control or direction over. Said differently, I'm very grateful and I'm truly humble about what we've been able to do with Ipswich. And there's also something just special about Ipswich, about being involved with a global fan base that cares so much about the club, that has the history that it has, and to see it, as I like to say, kind of back in its rightful place. I mean, Ipswich deserves to be one of the top clubs in England. It deserves to have sort of, global gravitas, which it enjoyed in the 70s, 80s, early 2000s. So anyway, long way of my saying that increasingly I don't want to be, and I wouldn't be, a minority shareholder in an asset where you have very little say or control. That's not how I'm wired. It's not, my investors are kind of in many respects expecting me and by extension my partners to have a say in direction. And I can handle the accountability a lot better when I have some form of control over it. And what I said differently, what I found is when I've made mistakes in the past, if it's entrusting other people's with the destiny relative to my investment. And that's where I've gotten into trouble or not seen success. So increasingly, as I like to say, I try to bet on myself.
Right, betting yourself, you rightly done that. I mean, looking at what you've said now, I look at comparisons between what's currently happening with just timely, obviously Manchester United with Jim Ratcliffe's minority ownership of Manchester United against the Blazers. I mean, he's had interviews where basically spoken about being sort of like emotionally impacted by the influx of like fans, with their commentary and the negative, opinions about his sort of like approach to operations. If you were in that same position, and obviously it's early days for Rhode Island, well, how would you sort of like follow through with the sort of like exposure of like opinions around how you're managing the operations of the club, specifically around Manchester United, because obviously this is the test case for trying to apply, cost cutting, private equity approach, well, the Jim Ratcliffe private equity approach to Manchester United.
Yeah, I from a distance, I have a great deal of respect for Jim Ratcliffe, certainly professionally, what he's done with his chemicals business, what he's done with Ineos, the car or truck. I if I understand or remember his CV, I think what he did was at Nice previously at Nice. So he certainly has had football success, but I don't know if that, was that luck or skill. I don't know. I mean, from my perspective, again, I'm never going to make a football decision for any of my clubs ever. I will never decide what player we'll sign. I'll never decide what lineup we'll start with. It's just never going to be my forte. Not my interest for getting into it. It seems like he's got a skill for it. I think he's gone through a very tough year in his first season. I mean, where did they finish? 16th?
Like that.
Oh, I mean, almost unheard of. They really weren't too far off from potentially being relegated, which is incredible to think of. But in general, for me, what I just say is a broader narrative, and it's a lot tougher in England. But I just try to stay. I'm in the public domain, certainly in terms of certain ventures. If you look at the Rhode Island project, a lot of times where we had difficulty just trying to get all the financing done, I just try to not really dwell on the headlines or my job and role is to put my right foot after my left foot and try to get stuff done and try to move things forward. And literally and figuratively, sometimes the ball bounces the right way, sometimes it doesn't. And it's just part of the journey. It's part of the adversity. But, again, in a long, long way of saying that I would never bet against Man U. I certainly wouldn't, and I think by extension, the Glazers probably have made a good decision over time of trying to bring someone like Radcliffe in and seeing if it can change the fortunes of Man U. And it's not going to happen overnight. And, I suspect he's got a much better sense of just how long a project it's going to be until they get it back to where they think they should be, which I'm sure is, truly top club or one of the top clubs in the world.
And in terms of the Tidewater landing project, which is obviously Rhode Island is a part of, what is, for context, this is a $400 million economic development project, probably more. Maybe you want to say something towards that. But in terms of this project, what is the ROI long term? Like, do you have a specific number that you obviously internally are working towards, or is it just more of sort of like every 3 to 2 years trying to make sure we meet that benchmark?
The long-term objective is, so the stadium is to be one of the finest venues of its size, certainly in America. And I think it's in a short period of time kind of proven that. I want Rhode Island FC to be one of the finest football clubs, certainly in USL and by extension in the world. I believe USL's superpower is the ability to give great quality of minutes to young players to develop talent. And increasingly, I'm very focused on finding roster where both American and foreign talent, we can sign young players, as I said, give them quality minutes and look to move them to what I'll call bigger and better leagues. And that's not a knock on USL. That's just a reality of where USL is. It's perfectly situated for us in Rhode Island to get a young player and give them positive exposure in front of 10,000 fans, and then also when they go to Louisville and some other great USL markets to, have the crucible being in front of 10,000 hostile fans. And it's very difficult to replicate that anywhere else at that young of age. Said differently, a lot of the academies, best and brightest, are playing in empty stadiums. And that's not the best way to eventually be a Premier League player. And then I think the real estate development is very important. USL adopting Division One, sanctioning, adopting promotion relegation. Those are all very important milestones to, I think, moving the overall attractiveness of the league to any investor and any player. I think that's all really, really important. It's something I'm very proud of, and I'm excited. I'm excited to see over time, especially with all eyes on the United States and Canada and Mexico next year with the World Cup. I think it's going to awaken a lot of people to the strength of the North American market, and also specifically to what I think are the unique attributes of the right USL club and the right market with the right stadium.
And in terms of the mechanisms in terms of trying to generate revenue for Rhode Island, where do you see the primary level to actually shift the revenue growth for Rhode Island? Because you've mentioned that you're hyper focused on making sure that you have a sustainable club. And this obviously is commendable considering what's going on in the UK.
Yeah, it's not a complicated business. It's ticket sales, merchandise, sponsorship primarily. It's obviously some food and beverage. And then increasingly, I believe that we can and should generate meaningful player sales, that we should. I look at the success of a Louisville and some of the sales that they've had, Charleston Battery, Orange County Football Club, USL clubs that have done a very good job developing talent and selling, in many instances, increasingly at seven figures with a sizable add-on clause. That's a business plan that I want to emulate. It's one that's becomes very, very important. And if you do it right, that complete combination with additional real estate development, you should have a very sustainable platform. And again, I eat, live, breathe, sleep trying to get to sustainability in this space, because it's a lot easier said than it is done.
Right. My question now ties into the markets and the league, but specifically around Rhode Island. So I think in 2020 USL Championship final, where you faced Colorado Springs Switchbacks, you had the game had over, well, let's just call it almost 500,000 viewers tune in for the game, and obviously a sellout crowd. What's the mechanism around trying to understand who's actually watching these games? What are the key demographics? Now, how do you obviously leverage that data to then generate more income revenue, as we just spoke about?
Yeah, I think when when MLS went behind the Apple paywall, that opened up the linear broadcast for USL. And, the ratings, I think, for that game were strong. We just had another game recently on CBS, which my understanding as well, the ratings were very strong. So I'll be interested to see long term what happens with that. They just released some numbers. MLS just released some numbers, and they, from a distance, it didn't look that impressive to me. So I don't know if at some point Apple decides to spin away from it, or if MLS decides that they shouldn't just cede the linear broadcast to USL. But look, I think at the end of the day, USL is putting a very compelling product on the pitch. And I think with the adoption of promotion relegation, the adoption of a Division One sanctioned league, a construct that from a fan perspective is far more compelling. Again, with the utmost respect to MLS, I will watch any foreign club play that's fighting for either promotion or fighting to avoid relegation any day of the week over a regular season match between two clubs that have no bearing at all in terms of, what I'll call their fate. You can be Miami and invest and have a Lionel Messi, and you could be Kansas City and do the exact opposite. Anyway, there's no repercussions to it. And so, long way of my saying, I've been very adamant that when it comes to engaging fans, and there's something about games of consequence, and I'm excited to be bringing that to the United States.
Right. You're speaking about incentive, and there's no incentive of trying to obviously compete for a reason that clubs don't have this jeopardy in the game. And that obviously is not compelling viewing, which is what the UK has, and which she has, and Europe in general.
If you do not invest, I'll say it differently, you have in every major league in the United States, from baseball to basketball to football to soccer, hockey, you're getting to a point where the television revenue is so great that the profit potential is so enormous. There's almost an incentive to a certain class of ownership to do the bare minimum to compete. And that's a disservice to their fan base. And, and so again, I just think that, you don't hit with games of consequences and truly repercussions. I mean, look at Wrexham. You think that Ryan Reynolds and McElhenney, part of the joy of that story? Imagine if they were stuck in a static league, so they were stuck in the National League in Wales, and they could win that every single year, ostensibly. Do you think anyone would really care about it? They wouldn't. They care about it because you know what? God bless, these guys are now up in championship. They're knocking on the door of the Premier League, and they've done it in the span of 4 years. It's unbelievable. There's no story like that. And if they bought an MLS team and, won an MLS Cup, people would sit there and say, yeah, that was fun. But they do it again the next year. It's like, is it really that much? Like, at some point, the narrative is just not as compelling.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the effect of tailwinds in any business is when you see something which is constantly being underutilized or undervalued, finding that level to push or to revitalize it or to restore it gives you enough tailwinds to obviously see it reach its potential or exceed its potential. And that's what Ryan Reynolds and Rob, that's what they saw. It's sort of like strategies applied in private equity, but applied in football in that sense. I mean, there's something that's very sort of revealing to me when it comes to the club crest, Rhode Island club crest. And obviously, Rhode Island is the ocean state. And that club crest comes from a single Rhode Island, which has been there since 1646, 1647, which is the 17th century. My question to you is, it's stated in the crest, description of the crest, the crest symbolizes the club's focus on hope and community. You see that in the way your players play, especially in the first season, where they refuse to give up, the never die attitude. Is that coming from you as the co-owner, the founder, the visionary behind this, or is it coming from the sort of like the fabric or the framework that you've laid out for club to follow?
Quick answer is it comes from the collection of individuals that help to comprise the platform. And that's everything from our incredible supporter base, but then also, the culture and background of Cano Smith in terms of the type of attitude. I mean, I'd say that attitude and never say die. I mean, you got to give him credit. Michael Parkhurst, who's my partner, co-founder, has an incredible playing CV and, deserves a lot of credit for recognizing how Kano would be if given the right chance to be a head coach. But it comes from a lot of different stakeholders. And certainly one of the things that we're very proud of in terms of in our inaugural season going all the way to the championship game, and I remain very positive relative to our ability to take on any club in USL. We've had a lot of injuries. It's been a little bit of a sophomore slump this year, but we're still fighting in the Jägermeister Cup, and I really like the way that cup's developing. And then we still have enough time to ideally tip the scale to get into the playoffs and see what we can do in the postseason. Hopefully we can have the kind of run that we had last year and see if lightning can strike again. But it's fun. But again, I love the quality of individual that we have on and off the pitch that are associated with this club. And ultimately, culture is something that you can't dictate. It just has to grow. You can be a part of it. You can kind of try to tip the scales here and there, but it really becomes a collective effort. And I just say with humility that I'm very proud of the culture that we're creating as an organization.
In terms of how it's managed, you are a founding member of the USL itself. As an owner of a club, USL now, which is Rhode Island, it's sort of like this collaboration that takes place between the league itself and the owners of each of the clubs.
Yeah, I say it all the time. I think the growth of the league, certainly now in my second decade, how the central office of USL, how they've grown, their ambitions. I think the partnership that we as ownership have with the league. And I also say very importantly, the quality of ownership. At the end of the day, the league is literally and figuratively only as strong in many respects as its weakest franchise. So you need to constantly be looking for what I'll say. It's not just deep pockets. Anyone can have deep pockets. That's not enough. You need a vision. You need to set a culture. There's so many different moving parts and so many stakeholders associated with this. In general, the overall quality of ownership groups, and again, I've in no particular order. If you look at New Mexico or look at Louisville and Oakland and Phoenix, obviously where I started from. Anyway, I'm really, really impressed, and that USL needs to continue to attract that quality of ownership because, as I said, none of this stuff's for the faint of heart. You really have to have a long-term vision and commitment because anything short of that and you won't be successful.
I completely agree with you on that point. In terms of your involvement, I think you sit on the board for the youth sports platform, which is Surf Sports. And I'm bullish on youth sports, but I think you just concluded a round of funding, raising $40 million investment. And this is youth sports platform that is like the biggest soccer platform in the States with over 100,000 boys and girls across all the clubs. My question here is basically, what is the vision for your involvement in this endeavor, and what do you think this can do to surf sport itself as a platform? What do you think it can do to create a more of a even playing platform or field for underprivileged boys and girls?
Yeah, so I like to say that the more time I spend in sport, the more interested I am in youth sports. And so from 6 years ago, I met with Brian Enge, who's the president of Surf. I had coveted an opportunity, if I could, to invest in it. Very happy, better late than never, that my fund has taken a strategic investment, that I've joined the board. And I'm very excited about where we can take the platform. And I do feel that obviously accessibility is an important facet of it. The best and brightest are often not the ones that are in youth sports, literally and figuratively don't have the means to it. So trying to find ways to increase or improve accessibility is going to be important. But I just think they're really, really well positioned to positively grow. And again, even just on, I guess, I'd love to see, is there access to some of the best and brightest boys and girls where over time, maybe they become a source of players for Rhode Island, maybe, even a source of players for, God willing, in Ipswich. So we'll see. But in general, I just felt it was very complementary to what I was doing in football in the States and in England. But it's only been 90 days. And already though, the growth of the business in the last 90 days and some of the things that have come through have been incredibly positive and just makes me very, very bullish on the overall platform.
Right. I mean, so this is something that I think is undervalued, not just in the US, but around the world, specifically around when you consider the fact that we have, an avalanche of digital technology, digital media, digital frauds for people to be closing their, the cocoon in that sense. Investors are obviously taking notice of the youth sports landscape. What do you think Europe is not seeing in that sense? And besides the fact that things are more traditional in Europe?
Well, I just speak for England. Most of the professional teams obviously invest a lot of money into their academies. They provide a pathway for the youth to play where, it's, I guess, said differently in the United States, families are used to paying money to invest in their kids in sports, which is a foreign concept in a lot of overseas markets. And so you can't kind of now pivot in England, if you will, and start to say to families, actually, you're going to now start to pay for this when historically it's been free, if you will, or largely free. So I think, again, for better or worse, that's the way this system works in the United States. I think families will continue to invest for a lot of reasons in programs and in particular sports for their children. But that being said, again, I do believe there needs to be an evolution of it. There needs to look at finding ways, and clubs do this already. It's not Pioneer, which is the parent company, or Surf specifically. There's for sure, they have pathways where they're providing financial support and access. And the question is at what level and can you do more? And I think you probably can. And I think it's important over time to do that.
In terms of valuation of USL clubs, I mean, you're planning to spend close to 500 million, 400 million plus dollars over the lifespan of the projects. What do you think would eventually consider you to reevaluate the valuation of the club or the project itself, specifically the club itself, in the next 5 to 6 years after obviously the World Cup, the FIFA World Cup 2026? What we hear, and the potential owners will be looking to sell minority stakes in the clubs. Obviously, most owners will not be selling the whole stake because obviously it makes no sense after a big event such as the World Cup.
Yeah, everything gets driven, a lot of it gets driven off revenue, and sports enjoy in general a very healthy multiple of revenue. MLS is a perfect example with a lot of teams that, very, very much double digit multiple of revenue in terms of their valuation. So at the end of the day, I feel the strategy has to be to obviously grow that revenue. And that's where all the different assets are very important. Owning the stadium was important to me and by extension, the ownership group. I believe strongly in that asset class, the importance and the value of teams that have world-class stadiums in a great location and they own that stadium, I think, versus being a tenant in that stadium. So that was a big part of it. Having all the real estate to develop is important. It becomes a very important asset class. And if if you're spending all the money to build a stadium, you need to make sure you control the assets around the stadium. I think that's important and certainly something I'm borrowing from a lot of other major sports teams and major markets, but I'm bringing it to a smaller or emerging market. Yeah, I think so. If you're a Division I sanction, so you're the same level from a sanctioning perspective as Major League Soccer, you should command a higher multiple, if you will, by extension, valuation. I think the commercial interest becomes that greater. I think at some point, the ability to sell the media rights in an environment that has promotion and relegation and games of consequence. So I think a rising tide kind of lifts all boats from a valuation perspective. But just to be clear, all of it will be predicated on ownership groups like ours investing money to get to the stadium to the size it needs to improve the quality of play on the pitch. Probably going to require another sort of level of playing skill. So the gap between, if you will, a Division I sanctioned USL and an MLS team is even smaller than it is today.
Yeah, it's remarkable. I mean, so this is we're basically rounding up the segments, and the final question I'd like to ask before moving to a very quick round of questions. So you recently got awarded Person of the Year by Pawtucket Foundation, and the governor of the state of Rhode Island basically praised you for being a visionary, obviously, being steadfast, being a bundle of energy in terms of positivity. And he said that your legacy would be the joy that you bring for families, which is kind of powerful. Well, not kind of, it is powerful. Was that the original vision for this in terms of hearing, in terms of what he said, in terms of having the joy brought up for families?
It was certainly a motivation. And it's one of the things I'm very proud of. This past Saturday, we had a game against Hartford. It was an exciting game. It ended up in a 2-2 draw. We ended up losing in penalty kicks, but, we advanced. It was the Jägermeister Cup game, but the energy in the stadium was incredible. And one of the things is the joy that I receive in seeing the diversity of our fan base, the families, the older couple, the students, the younger generations, and then just the incredible melting pot that is Rhode Island, the Colombians, the West Africans, the Cape Verdeans, the Portuguese, the Italians. The state deserves a team like Rhode Island FC. It deserves a stadium like we have now. It was not an easy project by any means. To my credit, and by extension, the credit of my ownership group, the credit of the governor, the credit of the mayor of Pawtucket, we all stuck together to make it a reality. And so that's what I'm very, very proud of. And again, it's early days. I'll never, ever celebrate. I will not relax. We have to work just as hard today as we did yesterday. So again, I try to treat it with complete humility, but to our credit, in a state that is not easy to get projects like this done, we did. A lot of projects that were announced in a whole host of other areas in the state did not move forward. And so I hope we can build from here. And I hope it becomes a catalyst for more investment in the state of Rhode Island. And in some respects, the credit that I believe I deserve is I saw an opportunity and I stayed with it, where I think a lot of people in the state of Rhode Island really didn't think it was going to materialize because there were other stakeholders in the state that tried to get a stadium done for a baseball team and didn't get it done. And so they thought their knee-jerk reaction was that this will never happen. And I'm very, again, with total humility, I'm very happy that we got it done because, as I said, it deserved to get done. But I think if I knew then a lot of what I know now, maybe you don't try to even attempt the project, and that would have been a real shame.
Yeah, I think the founder of NVIDIA, he also said the same thing. He said if he knew then what he knows now, he definitely would not have started.
Look, it's the benefit of being an entrepreneur sometimes is that, you sometimes don't stop to think about how realistic something is. You set your mind to it and you just keep going until you achieve it. So again, today it's a lot of fun for me to bring friends and in particular my family who, a lot of times where I was away from them, countless trips to make this project a reality for them to see, if you will, that come to fruition. that's also very satisfying as well. And it's got me motivated to do that much more in the state of Rhode Island. And it's got me motivated to do more so that we can see projects like this go into other communities that deserve it as well.
Right. You speak about more. So, what to follow up on that? What new opportunities or next new future opportunities you see coming up in the horizon in terms of not just from a real estate perspective, but also from a sport perspective?
Well, I'm going to continue to increase my investment in Ipswich. I believe strongly in the long term of that platform. Obviously, very focused on now the housing surrounding the stadium in Rhode Island. You mentioned I'm raising capital for a really interesting rodeo. It's a country music festival and rodeo, which I'm really excited about. I'll continue to work closely on my youth soccer platform. So it's really kind of spending time on the core assets that exist right now. And then again, the exciting thing is that opportunities present themselves all the time. And, when I see something that I like increasingly, if I spend my time and energy and by extension bring what I think is the collective network that I've been blessed to kind of put together with all this, more often than not, I'm finding that we can make things happen, which is exciting.
Great. And then the final segment is basically I ask a quick question and you give me what comes to mind. So the first one will be considering what you've said during this call, during this discussion, what would have been the period during your entrepreneurial journey where you felt that the universe tested you a lot and you felt like reconsidering your approach to going deep into entrepreneurship?
There were many dark, dark days with Arizona United, which was my predecessor club to Phoenix Rising. So trading through that was a valuable lesson. There were a lot of moments along the way in Rhode Island that the project was hanging by a tenuous thread. And so all of that adversity has served me well in terms of, continuing to do whatever it takes to try to bring these projects to fruition or, see them have a brighter day.
Right. And in terms of, we spoke about your parents being entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs. Do you feel like you've met the expectations or exceeded it?
Oh, I was a proud day when my parents were at the stadium opener in Rhode Island to see that firsthand. It was, one of the, and by extension, my wife and kids. But I work hard every single day and feel very blessed to be involved with projects that have a huge social and economic impact to the areas that they're, Ipswich has changed. The town has changed for the better. Pawtucket, Rhode Island has certainly dramatically changed for the better as a result of these projects. Again, I try to say all the time, I try to stay completely humble relative to the journey, but I'm very proud of these things because they're important and they're making a difference.
And second to last question. So you've stated that if you wanted to have a second team in the league, potentially you could give that to your brother. Is that something that you'd consider seriously?
No, no, no. It's kind of like you can only be married, if you will. I've really exited Phoenix Rising. I'm very much, and I couldn't have timed it better because the day that was really my last day to be involved with Phoenix Rising. They won the championship. But then I shifted my loyalty, time, and attention to Rhode Island. And you can't date two people in the same league for a lot of reasons, So Ipswich is my English club, Rhode Island is my USL club, and we'll see. If my brother ever wanted to get into it, he's not as passionate about the beautiful game as I am. I mean, he's getting there, but anyway, long way of my saying that I Rhode Island is really my primary, that's my marriage, if you will. I'm very, very dedicated to day in and day out and will be for the rest of my life, God willing.
Right. Yeah, and everyone can see that following online. Final question. So I like to finalize this with books. So I know you're a reader of books. Your dad is a voracious reader of books also, of novels. What book has impacted you the most and why?
Yeah, I mean, it's Who Not How for sure. Who Not How. 10x is easier than 2x, which is also by Dan Sullivan. And then Ben Hardy, who is the co-author of both, I think of both those books. He has a new book that literally I'm going to get my hands on later on tonight. But those books have been by far the most influential. It's hardly a day goes by where my brother and I don't quote Who Not How. If someone wants to be an entrepreneur, that would be in my number one, number two, and number three recommendation.
Great. Awesome. And that's a wrap. Thank you so much, Brett, for being on the show.
What a
And thank
pleasure.
you.
You're
Great.
good, man. I'm blown away with the depth of your due diligence, my friend. If I ever need to research anything, I'm probably going to give you a call and ask for your help on it.
Awesome. Right. And that's a wrap for this episode with Brett Johnson. And Brett has been fantastic with us, explaining to us his vision for Rhode Island, his approach to investing, and everything alongside the lines of trying to build an impactful vision that can impact societies and communities as a whole. And if you enjoyed this episode, please do share, like, and contribute to the discussion further. And see you until next time. Have a good one. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.